Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hi, my name is Patrick Norris, and I am so excited to guide you into our brand new platform called Red Ink Revival. I'm so glad to have you with us wherever you get podcasts or in the video version on YouTube. Our vision is to grow leaders through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. We believe that driven leaders ought to know what they're driven by. We move beyond great leadership tactics and executable principles to dig into the emotional circuits of what's driving you. We want to know why you shut down, or why you overreact, or why you stew in your frustrations. We want to know why you want to execute great techniques but somehow get stuck. We even want to know why we, as smart leaders, have a propensity to do dumb things. We all know that our best intentions, our best principles, and the best teachings can be hijacked by our past griefs, losses, and traumas from childhood on up. My goal is to bring high content value that addresses where leaders live. In future episodes, I'll be interviewing experts, neuroscientists, psychologists, therapists, marketplace leaders, and pastors. We're going to dive into things like how attachment styles impact our perceptions, or how leadership boundaries keep us healthy. What of a codependent leadership profile shows up for us, and so much more. We won't simply tell you what you should do, but why you do what you do and how to rewire to restore leadership joy. This podcast series is for all leaders in all spheres of leadership, from marketplace to church and nonprofits to parenting in the home. I am a pastor with over 30 years of senior leadership experiences, so be aware that many of our interviews, they're going to bend back into church world illustrations, as that's just where my experiences come from. However, the principles will cross-pollinate no matter where you lead and what sphere you're in. And you probably will come to know we are bringing wholehearted leadership to pastors, church staffs, and marketplace leaders, those who are stockholders in their church, to bring a revival to the world around them. We're going to drop new content every week, shooting for each Thursday of the month. I'd like to ask you to subscribe to this podcast, like it, comment in reviews, and if the content is valuable to you, I'd like to ask you to get the word out by sharing on your social media platforms. Before we begin the interview today, I want to tell you about one of our great Red Ink sponsors. Hey guys, let me take a minute to tell you about our friends at Marketing with Wisdom, a Christian agency connecting brands with their community through relationship-centered marketing. They provide comprehensive branding, marketing, and advertising solutions. Marketing with Wisdom is a full-service Christian marketing agency that serves clients in various industries. They work with churches, businesses, nonprofits, musicians, authors, and podcasts, among others. My friend, Wisdom Moon, is the founder and CEO. He has 15 years of experience in marketing, business, and Christian music, as well as over 20 years of experience in church and nonprofit ministry. The entire Marketing with Wisdom team has helped numerous brands with branding, consulting, marketing, and advertising, including Red Ink Revival. They consistently deliver ideas and solutions that have exceeded our and other clients' expectations. What I love is they do everything in an open and transparent and collaborative environment. Go check them out, marketingwithwisdom.com. Then tell them Patrick Norris at Red Ink Revival sent you. They will love you and treat you like family. That's marketingwithwisdom.com. As we launch into today's episode, I want you to know that the entire month of January, we will be interviewing our anchor guests and teammates in the Red Ink Tribe. These amazing people feel a specific calling from God on their lives to be voices carrying the mission in the Red Ink Revival platform. Our desire is to introduce them with their backstories so you can engage their content and have a context of them. This week, I am so excited to introduce you to our anchor therapists, Rick and Christine Presley. They have combined expertise as licensed clinical marriage and family therapists. They are certified as sexual addiction professionals, certified in partner trauma therapy, and in trauma recovery practices like EMDR, which is eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. They have served in pastoral staff ministry for many years. Their story of addiction, pain, and ultimate recovery has been featured on James Robinson's TV program, Life Today. As you can imagine, we are beyond blessed to have them on our team and in our very first episode together as therapists. Thanks again for joining us today. Let's go now into this week's episode. Well, let's jump in. I want everybody to know who you guys are. I want there to be out of the gate a heart connection to you all. So, you both are therapists, and I'd like everybody to hear how you guys became therapists, and just some highlights to your story. What's your background?
Okay, so this is Rick, and I have been in as a therapist for almost 10 years now, and what got me into it was my own story in addiction recovery. So from a pretty young age, 12, 13, there was some pretty significant problematic sexual behaviors in my life that were very, very secretive, and nobody knew about them. And so that just continued kind of like a snowball throughout my teenage years, my college years, my early adult, early married years. Acted out in lots and lots of different ways. And then about 6 years into our marriage, I sat Christine down one day and just kind of verbally vomited all over her everything that I had been doing. And we floundered big time for the next 6 or 7 years trying to find good help. We went to several different therapists. Some things they did were good, and some things were not. And but the kind of the theme throughout all of them was once they really heard our story, it felt like as if they had seen a deer in headlights kind of experience. Like they didn't know what to do with us. And so, in combination with that, and then just to be fair to those therapists, I wasn't ready either. Yeah. I wasn't ready for help. I wasn't ready to do the hard work of recovery. So it was just ups and downs and relapses and all kinds of crazy for years. And then we finally got hooked up with a therapist that just really knew what he was doing. And I felt, on one hand, it scared me that he knew what he was doing, because I was like, oh crap, he knows me. Like he knows what he's doing. But on the other hand, certainly it provided a lot of safety and a lot of hope.
Wow.
And so got into recovery, got sober, and that was in 2007. And then just one decision after another. We were in full-time ministry not up until that point, but for many of those years, we were in full-time ministry in various local churches. And so we just made the decision to step out of that kind of forever. And I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but definitely still had a heart to help people. So I finished my undergrad, which I hadn't finished yet. So I went back to school and finished that, and then went back to school to get my master's and get my state license. And that was finished that up in 2010. So amazing. That's the abbreviated story of the journey. So
when you started the story, you were talking about how when you were 11, 12 years old, that there was significant acting out sexually or a backstory. Just so that there's context, you were sexually abused early in your life, and that became a part of the story that was now driving you in the future. Then you're in ministry. So, you go to a college, you get a degree, you are an associate pastor, and, that has its own context and dynamics and networks of relationships and fears and, what does all this mean? How do I deal with the intersection of so many different pieces of who I am? And then, of course, you have, the acting out being made public to Christine. So, Christine, you're an associate pastor's wife.
Yes.
You had no idea when you were getting married that this was all going to happen. 23 years you've been married now.
Right.
And so to me, it's just an incredible story. So tell your perspective of, again, how did you end up being a therapist? But the backstory is so entertaining and yet so sad. And so we can identify with it. We feel it. So tell us.
Yeah. Well, 2 years ago, I've been a therapist almost 2 years. And so then 4 years prior to that, I started feeling like this was going to be my journey. We were asked to speak at a conference. And so I thought, I have no idea how to answer the question, how did you stay? Because I just stayed. I just did it. And so I thought, I really need to put some words to like what I'm feeling. And so when I started to go and do research, I was surprised that everything had shifted research-wise. So before, when we would go to see these therapists that Rick had talked about, it mirrored the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where the partner, the spouse, the one who is betrayed is then codependent or an enabler. And they now call that treatment-induced trauma because I didn't know. I did not have a clue that this was my partner's story and now became my story. And so as I started doing research, it was like I was known and I was reading my own experience I could not believe it. It was so congruent to what I was feeling inside of me, how I felt crazy all the time, just all of the different symptoms and all of the research that they've done on how parallel addiction partners' experience is to PTSD symptoms. Just thing after thing after thing after thing. And I thought, I want to be able to help people realize that they're not crazy too.
Yeah.
Now that I know that there's like a way out, like a literal, this is what you need to do to heal, to walk this journey, whether your relationship sticks or not. But it was all because I didn't know how to answer the question for myself, how did you stay? How did you endure that 7 years of promise and betrayal, promise and betrayal? And then, here you are, you're still married 23 years later. Now I'm a therapist helping people. And it's been a crazy journey.
Wow. Well, let's talk just a minute about your training and certifications. What kind of training have you had as therapist that have given you the best tools, the best resources that have both helped you and helped clients? Again, what about this training or certification makes you passionate? So what are they? What are you trained and certified in?
So we are both marriage and family therapists. And so in our graduate degree, as going to a marriage and family therapy program, 100% of the theories that we learn in that are systems theory. And some clients will ask, well, what's a systems theory or what's a systems theorist? What's the difference between a marriage and family therapist versus maybe other mental health professionals? And I use a very, very broad stroke analogy. This doesn't apply 100%, but it does get there. I use the analogy of a baseball game. So if the client is the batter in the baseball game, and you've got me as a coach that's sitting up in the stands, watching what's going on with the batter, and you've got maybe a psychologist standing there with me alongside of us, The psychologist has got their binoculars on, really assessing the batter. What's going on for them? How are they standing? How are they holding the bat? How are they swinging? All this kind of stuff. So they're very individual focused in their assessment, largely. As a marriage and family therapist or as a systems theorist, we take the binoculars off and we look at the whole playing field. So we want to look at a whole team and how they're playing together. So when it comes to our clinical work, our systems theory really is about assessing a person's whole experience as, a member of a family, as a member of a marriage. How are we all playing together to do this game of life? So not that a psychologist or another mental health professional can't do systems theories, but we are uniquely trained in that to a greater degree and a deeper depth. And so that's our training.
Because you really can't separate that, right? I mean, you can't separate an individual's behavior from the systems that have gone into who they are and the relationships.
Right. I don't think you can. And I'm very biased towards that. But the treatment of it is also about treating the system and not just the individual.
Yep.
So that's where the biggest difference you'll find in how mental health professionals approach it is in the treatment of that. They will for sure gain a lot of information about their history and about what's created them up till now. But then a systems theorist is very equipped to treat the whole family from that type of thing. So yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
yes, am I biased about that? Yes. For sure.
As you should
For
be.
sure.
As you should be.
And then both of us have gone on to train in the CSAT world. So we're both through the second phase of that. So CSAT stands for Certified Sex Addiction Therapist. It's through the International Institute of Addiction and Trauma Professionals.
Yes.
And so we're both about halfway through that, as you are as well. And you've been through this.
Yeah, and I have studied and memorized IITAP over and over, so I could finally figure out how to say it. But yes, International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. Whoop, there it is. Anyway, yes.
Yeah. So we're both there, and I've done some other study and certifications in the world of sexual addiction, problematic sexual behavior too. And then Christine, I'll let her talk about some of the specialized training she's doing for spouses.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you both are doing the sexual addiction training, but you're digging deep in the partner recovery component.
Yeah.
So talk about that. And since you're on mic now, since we're on that, hit EMDR and some of the other stuff that you do.
Okay. So yes, I will start the partners certification, certified partner and trauma therapist. It doesn't roll quite as easily as CSAT. It's CPT. It's like
That's right.
they just need to make it easier, but it's not. So it's a partners certification specifically designed to treat partners of sex addicts where there's been betrayal trauma. And again, as I talked about in my introduction, there is such a need to work with the partners. The partners are often, whether it be financial based or they just don't think that it's their issue, or they don't have the time, they're taking care of the kids. I mean, there's just so many other issues that play into why partners don't come and get help, and yet they are suffering with trauma,
Yes.
like post-traumatic stress disorder, symptomatic trauma. And so I am very passionate about working with partners, because otherwise they just walk around, and eventually Bessel van der Kolk has a book, The Body Keeps the Score, and eventually the body will respond to the trauma that they're experiencing, and it'll come out one way or the other.
Yes.
And so to walk a partner through the different stages of the trauma and help them to develop boundaries and just basically self-regulation and just all of the things that we'll talk about in a future episode. It's just really passionate for me. So tagging along with that is we're both trained in EMDR, which is eye, movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a trauma tool or a modality to help people deal with the effects of trauma in their life so that they can stay in the present instead of being overstimulated by the effects of previous trauma in their life.
Let me take a minute and introduce you to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Retreats. These retreats are 40-plus hour experiences with psychologists, therapists, and pastors to help you dig deep into your leadership profile. These experiences from previous attenders have been testified that they are some of the greatest times in God that they have ever had. Others said this is the greatest miracle that my wife says she's ever experienced of me. I want to encourage you to listen to this testimony and join us for one of our upcoming 2020 leadership retreats.
How would I describe being at a Red Ink Revival leadership retreat? I would describe it as very challenging. It stretched me in many ways, spiritually, mentally, emotionally. It made me rethink a lot of things in not just what I believe, but how I believe, how I think. And so it really stretched me in those ways. I've studied theology my whole life. You study, the study of God is what theology is, but the whole idea of psychology was always kind of on the back burner. It wasn't, we dealt a little bit in it, but didn't really get into it too deeply. But neuroscience was totally, off the charts with me. I had no idea of what it all meant. After this week, I really see how God created us and brings all three of these components together and can help me be a better leader, a better pastor, a better person, a better husband, and how they'll all just integrate to make me a better person. I think I'll take what I learned this past week as a pastor, as a parent, as a grandparent, as a husband. I think I'm going to be more patient. I think I will be more thoughtful in how I respond to people. I won't be so quick to respond, but I'll kind of take a step back, survey the situation, and ask more meaningful questions to help me arrive at where the person I'm dealing with, where they're at, and where they're coming from. If they're coming very emotionally, it'll help me locate them in a better way. Instead of reacting, I can respond in a better way. My favorite part of the retreat were the process groups. That was a real time of really just opening your heart and sharing your story, your life, your victories, your defeats, your hurts in such a way that was safe. It was very emotional, but you got responses from people, many of which I'd never met before in my life, in our group, in such a way that brought such healing and comfort and acceptance, and that was powerful for me. I used the word stretching earlier. That's how it was. Just my mind, it just stretched my mind in such a way to not be so surface in my thinking, but to really dig deeper and think deeper. And I'm not going to be so quick to judge people. My thoughts before coming to this retreat, I think I said it to you at one time. I said I was scared because I knew I was going to be dealing with and delving into some subjects that I had never talked to anybody about before, and that scared me to a degree. But after being here and listening and just the whole atmosphere of this retreat, the fear left, and I was able just to share my heart in very deep and meaningful ways, and I really believe I got the help that I needed. For me, it's not going to be kind of a blanket, just invite everybody I know. I'm going to be more selective, but there are numbers of people that I know that I think a retreat like this would be mind-blowing, life-changing, and help them immensely.
I think it's interesting when you talk about like EMDR training and even any of the trauma recovery. I used to assume that some of it was like psycho voodoo.
Yeah.
It's just, some weird concoction by somebody who had too much time on their hands. But when I began to see the brain science behind it and understanding that these are not just some ethereal emotions that we're dealing with, we're actually dealing with fundamental processing of the human body and the brain. And when these treatments are given, they actually help the brain and the body recover. All of a sudden, I moved from kind of this skeptic and cynic to being a person who's like, oh my gosh, we've got to get this information in front of people because it can dramatically change their lives. It can help them in crazy ways. So both of you are, sexual addiction therapists. You're certified. And if I'm a listener and if I'm a part of tuning into this podcast, I'm wondering, well, if I'm not struggling with any sexual acting out, how is your expertise relevant to me? So if you would, guys, address that because, we know that the same processing goes into any behavior and any emotional state. So if you guys would talk about, how does this relate to a mom who's just struggling with body image or somebody who struggles with food and can't seem to pull that back and actually love themselves well?
Yeah. Well, I think there is so many similarities because the foundation for all your maladaptive behaviors or all your problematic behaviors is shame, is trauma, is wound, different wounds that we have had. So the stuff of life, the experiences that we have in life are similar to all of us. We just pick up different behaviors along the way that we deem, that we kind of give preference to, or seem more acceptable, or we're able to hide better, or we have greater access to. Yeah. There's lots of factors that go into why we choose various behaviors to help cope and soothe ourselves. But that's what we're doing. So whatever your maladaptive behavior is, it's going to cope and soothe that painful place, that hurt place in us that hasn't yet been healed, restored, redeemed, whatever. So in that way, what we do, we can essentially, what we tell people, like there's so many similarities to any other thing that you might be dealing with. The reason why we got specialized in sexual addiction, one, because that's our story and we want to help people out of that, and because it is an emerging field within mental health. It is gaining a lot of traction. And it's becoming a bigger problem within our society because of internet pornography and other things. But there is also some very specific nuances to the problematic sexual behavior and how that impacts a spouse or how that impacts a marriage that are very different. Really different than other problems like drugs or alcohol. And like Christine was talking about the trauma, you can clearly see how a partner has been traumatized when they find out the secret that's been going on. Whereas somebody that's in drugs and alcohol, the partner, those behaviors are not necessarily a secret. And for that reason alone, it sets the relationship up for a really, really hard struggle in healing and repairing from that. That's a little different. So, but a lot of the things we say, a lot of the foundation of our work is applicable to just about everything.
Yeah.
Because it's all, like I said, it's shame.
Yeah.
The foundation of that is shame, and we'll get into that later. But
yeah, well, and just to tag on to that is one of my favorite phrases is all behavior makes sense in context.
Yeah.
And people's maladaptive choices, their choice of drug or their next hit, is because of something.
Yeah.
They're choosing to take that road instead of turn toward themselves and find out what is actually really happening, or it's even intolerable that they're not able to sit with the feelings that they have. And so they're trying to escape that. And so someone who has depression, anxiety, any type of response that's happening that is clinical can be treated. Yes, there's sometimes it is a chemical imbalance of some sort, but most often those types of things are based in the trauma, which then creates this shame and this story that we tell ourselves. And so that's a Brene Brown thing. It's just like the story we tell ourselves. And if we can just slow down the behavior and identify the context of what's happening, it really offers a lot of like insight and compassion towards our own self.
Yes.
So that we can then heal whatever's going on with the shame, so that the maladaptive choices are not actually necessary.
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally does. I think that's amazing. And I think what I learned in the training and process that we've been in is that if you understand the sexual acting out processing, that's extreme, and especially in the more excessive acting out. But that's so extreme. And yet our sexuality is one of the most base lens for which we can understand ourselves. And if we understand what drives that, then if it's that extreme, you can understand really everything else that could be happening on the inside of you. And so I know you guys are therapists. I'm not. I just admire you and colleagues that are in the trenches working with people every day. I got to be honest, I'm glad that I don't do the one-on-one every day, but I admire you guys that do. I'm a pastor, and I love theology. And I do want to say for the audience to have context that everything you're describing here, there is biblical foundations for. You guys might be using terminology that's different than the terminology of, the ancient writers of Scripture. But for instance, the word shame has been used a lot here. And the truth is, a lot of people hear the word shame today and they think, oh, I don't have any shame. But if you look at their behaviors, there's no way they can behave that way without it having a root in shame. And so it's just using the best words we have to help people. But biblically, shame is nothing but an unrighteous consciousness, for which the writers of the New Testament would talk about a righteous consciousness. It is a gift from God that you are worthy, you are valuable, you are enough. And so throughout the entire Bible, there is a foundation of processing human behavior that I have gained new insights on simply by going through the secular training on sexual addiction behavior. So I think it's just incredible that we get to spend this time together. I'd like to shift just for a minute our applications. How would what we're talking about really help somebody who is a marketplace leader or a ministry leader, another pastor? How do we use the things that's going to make them be better at who they are in what they're living out in their lives?
I think there's so much value that we gain from understanding why we do the things we do.
Oh, man.
I came from growing up, I came from a very conservative church, like really conservative.
Rigid,
super rigid. Lots of rules. And whatever our listening audience thinks rigid is, they should go to the one I went to. They'll be like, wow, that's pretty bad. So, the language that I was taught growing up was all about sin, was all about the sinful man, and the importance of salvation, the importance of sanctification. And those two words, sanctification and salvation, was the answer to all your problems.
Yeah.
And so the message that I carried around with me was, well, I'm doing these things in private and in secret, so therefore I'm not saved, I'm not sanctified, I'm not I'm not okay. God doesn't love me. God's a God of judgment, so he's mad at me, you know. So there was no ability to understand why. There was not an arena. There was not a safe place in my home or in my church or anybody to ask questions and ask why. One, because I don't think they would have the answer to my questions, but two, what I would get would be sanctification or salvation. That's your answer, you know? Yeah. So for me to understand why I do what I do, to understand what's going on in my brain, how my brain has been wired, how my experiences in life have led me to the point where I'm at, the good and bad, and not to blame anyone, but just to simply understand context, then now gives me a whole lot more hope for myself.
Yes.
A whole lot more energy for the work that I need to do to heal.
Yeah.
It gives me traction.
Yeah.
You know? So anybody, whether you're ministry leader or marketplace leader or whatever, we're fallen, broken people.
Yeah.
We all have things.
Absolutely.
And they're either known to yourself or they're not known to yourself, and they're probably really well known to spouses and family and coworkers.
Absolutely.
Because usually they can identify our problems better than we can. And to be able to really get at the core of why you do what you do, instead of just behavior management, to somehow just not get angry at my coworkers again. Just don't do it.
Just got to do better.
Do better, right. To get at what's going on underneath that and really change the foundation of that, so you're just not as tempted to do it. You're just not as there's the energy pocket that you'll probably refer to that's there, that gets tapped into, that makes me get so angry. Will begin to be healed.
Yeah.
And then that's way better than just putting a Band-Aid on it.
Oh man.
Well, as you were saying, if you're, I was thinking that I also learned that you can't take people farther than you have gone.
Come on.
And I think as a leader, it's so important, because your congregation or your workplace employees or whomever you're leading, they can see. Yeah. They can call BS like nobody's business because they can feel it.
Yeah.
And so
that's true.
And not just because of that, but also you want to be able to stand in front of your group and say, hey, I've been here, I've done that, and there is hope that you can also do this too.
Yes.
So it just provides hope, and then it also provides a vulnerability, and then also an authenticity in just being yourself instead of having to hide or put a mask on or whatever, just being able to be real.
Yes.
Wearing a mask takes so much energy, so much work.
Oh, man.
And the freedom to be able to just be yourself, have grace for yourself, have hope for yourself.
As I study leadership, what I think is that you first have to understand why are you a leader? Why are you doing what you're doing? And many leaders started, particularly in a ministry context, pastors, they began the journey of pastoring because they had some gifts, they saw that people liked it, and it made them feel good. And the feeling that they had often was a feeling of power. When they've lived in their lives powerlessly for so long, or they were unseen, unknown, unheard, all of a sudden now I feel validated. But what happens is the underworld, the inner world of their life that is masking, the power is just simply masking the real issues that have been unprocessed and unresolved, now then begins to show up in their leadership. And they think that because if I preach good, if I lead good, that everything's going to be great. But the shame and the rage that sometimes just rumbles like a Harley-Davidson motor, just right under the surface. And so some of the leadership styles, not just why we do it now, but how we lead, sometimes when we lead with a heavy hand, why would somebody be a heavy-handed leader? Why would they be a dictator? Why would they be dominant? Well, there are reasons behind that they don't know. Why would there be a leader who just quits and submits on whatever and just doesn't stand for what their own convictions are? Why would there be, leaders who have to achieve the biggest mountain out there, that they refuse to be quote unquote ordinary? Which we have an interesting conflict within ourselves, that anything that is ordinary is less than, and I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, and so my life doesn't matter. And it's big in ministry today. And that doesn't mean you don't have a vision. That doesn't mean, the fact is when you live healthy, you get to go pursue a vision. You're free to do it. You're not chasing some validation of identity that now then if I could just win. And in conversations with pastors, and it's true of marketplace leaders as well, if they can get a certain level, for a pastor, if they could get 1,000 people to attend their church, or 2,000 or 5,000, and that number shifts. So if you ever reach 1,000, it'll be 2,000. Sure. If you ever get 2,000, it'll be 5,000. The same in the marketplace. If I could just get, our bottom line $1 million worth of income in our business, that would be enough. And then they get that, and they realize that didn't satisfy the depth of their emotions and feeling of identity, and so then they got to have 2 million, and then 5 million, and nobody ever stops to think that's materialism. That is something external trying to meet an internal need. So all that we're going to talk about, the things we're going to process together, are simply going to free people to live in whatever their dreams, visions, assignments that God's given them, to be able to do it from a position of freedom rather than a position of pursuing something that they're not yet.
Thank you for joining us. You might be wondering, what's next? I want to encourage you to go to our website at redinkrrevival.com. There you're going to find our resources like retreats, upcoming special events, and a growing bank of content. Sign up for our free e-newsletter to stay abreast of all that is available. Of specific note, we are hosting our next Red Ink Revival Leadership Retreat for pastors on March 2nd through the 6th. Also note the church staff retreat is April 20th through the 24th. Our Marketplace Leaders Retreat is June 29th through July 3rd. I hope everybody can make it to one of these life-changing events. Everything we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our tribe. I can't wait until our next episode, and I'm glad that you were with us today. We'll see you next time.